Hey, hey! The light breeze swept across a desolate wilderness, rolled up a large piece of loess on the earth, and floated it to the distance, like a thin earth-yellow net, following the direction of the wind blowing, shrouded in the distance. Go with. Through this layer of earth-yellow sand, you can see that there seems to be a group of people in the distance, bracing the scorching sun, advancing in this desolate wilderness. Li Sheng licked his somewhat chapped lips. Li Sheng reached out and took off his water bag from the horse, opened the water bag and took a sip, but did not drink much, because there was not much water in it, so they should have more. It takes a day or so to find a place where they can replenish water. At this point in time, in fact, it is logically not suitable for driving, because the sun is too harsh. Li Sheng felt that the armor he was wearing turned into a steamer. If he keeps on drying it, it will be like a soldering iron. Looking back at his back, the team of about 100 people, almost all wearing armor, knows from the traces of armor left on them, that this is a team with real combat effectiveness, maybe even not long ago just participated in the battle. But at this time, perhaps because of the weather and the environment, this seemingly sophisticated team seemed a little lifeless, almost all of them burying their heads in silent driving, except for the sound of footsteps, horseshoes, and wheels, only the armor rubbing. The sound of the collision gave people the impression that morale was a little low. Li Sheng glanced at the soldiers in the team, and finally turned his gaze to the only carriage in the center of the team. Looking at the carriage that was also very quiet, Li Sheng thought for a while and controlled the horse under his crotch. Left the forefront of the team, slowly approaching the carriage in the middle of the team. The soldiers in the team saw this scene, and many people raised their heads, their eyes followed Li Sheng's figure, and they looked at the carriage in the middle of the team. Boom, boom! Li Sheng raised his right hand, tapped his fingers on the wooden beam of the carriage near the window of the carriage twice, and then spoke softly. Princess, has your highness's injury improved? Can you check it out at the end? As soon as Li Sheng's voice fell, the curtains of the carriage were opened immediately, revealing a haggard face. Although it was very pretty, the fatigue and worry on his face could not be concealed at all. After opening the curtains of the carriage, the woman looked at Li Sheng in front of the carriage, and did not say anything to him. Instead, she turned her head and looked at the person lying behind her. Li Sheng's gaze also looked at the person lying there, looking at the other's closed eyes and slightly blue complexion. Li Sheng couldn't help his heart tighten, and he secretly said a bad word in his heart. The person lying there was the one he wanted to protect and send back to the royal capital this time. It was very important to the entire country of Yu, but looking at the other person's current appearance, his face turned blue and his anger was like a gossamer. It is a symptom of some poisoning, and the injury has been extremely bad. Of course, such injuries need to be healed immediately, but where they are now, there is no cure at all. The original warlock in the team also died in a previous attack. Now he is facing this situation. Li Sheng simply can't do anything. Taking a deep breath, Li Sheng didn't intend to continue investigating the opponent's injury. Even if the investigation was clear, he would not be able to help the opponent and treat the opponent's injury. As for the woman who opened the curtains of the carriage, she looked at Li Sheng with a look of expectation at this time. When Li Sheng was about to withdraw her gaze, she immediately spoke. General, your highness seems to be getting worse now, what can you do? Hearing this, Li Sheng was just about to answer the opponent truthfully, telling him that there was nothing he could do, but when his gaze swept to the corner of the carriage and quietly curled up in the little figure there, he turned what he wanted. He swallowed what he said, then said comfortingly. There is no good way for the end, General, now, but a few days ago, the original warlock with the army had used sorcery to call for help. After so many days, there should be someone coming to support, at least there will be warlocks, the other side it should be able to rescue His Royal Highness Neo. Hearing Li Sheng's words, the woman's expectations turned into disappointment, but because the other party said that someone might come to support her, her hopes were not completely shattered, and she still retained a little fantasy. I hope that those who come to support will come soon. His Highness's injury can no longer be delayed. He has been protons in Chi for so many years, and what he wants to do is to return to his homeland. Now His Highness's hope is about to be achieved. At least, let your Highness take another look at his homeland, and be able to meet the father again." As the woman said, her tone became a little choked, and tears were already welling out of her eyes. Seeing this, Li Sheng felt a little uncomfortable, but he still said something comforting. But he was in his prime, as a general, he controlled his emotions very well. "Please don't worry, the princess, I will return to the country of you soon. Your Royal Highness will be fine. Please take good care of your Royal Highness and the little Royal Highness." After speaking, Li Sheng immediately saluted, and then drove the horse under his hips, and left the carriage. He didn't like to see the cry of the woman's house. The team is still moving forward, and the temperature seems to be getting higher and higher. The faces of the soldiers in the team are almost covered with sweat, and many people's water bags seem to be empty. Li Sheng noticed this, but now he has nothing to do. There is no warlock with the army in the team, and there is still a long way to replenish the water source. Now everyone can only endure it. Fortunately, the most difficult period of time should pass soon. Slowly wait until the sun is deviated, the temperature will not be as hot as before, and everyone should be able to get to the place to replenish water. "General, Ping Shan is in front of you. The weather is too hot, or let's just rest there, and then continue on the road." Next to Li Sheng, a knight looked forward and appeared in the field of vision, a slightly khaki-colored one. The vegetation covered mountain peaks. After pursing his lips, he spoke to Li Sheng. "All right, after arriving at Ping Shan, let everyone take a break." Li Sheng nodded when he heard the words and replied. It took a long time for everyone to hurry today. In addition, the weather is really hot, and it is indeed necessary to take a break. Furthermore, let everyone take a break and restore their physical strength, so that they can better cope with the accident and danger that may occur at any time. Soon, a line of more than 100 people was getting closer and closer to the not-so-large Ping Shan in front. Most of the people in the team knew that everyone would have a rest here. Now, one by one felt a little relaxed, and the atmosphere was not as silent as before. And just as they approached Ping Shan, when everyone was about to take a break, suddenly, a somewhat miserable wailing sound suddenly sounded from Ping Shan. Immediately afterwards, there seemed to be something very fast, with a smoky dust, running down Ping Shan quickly. "Ah, stop, stop!" Hearing the miserable screams coming from his ears, and judging that the sound was moving rapidly from far away, Li Sheng immediately became vigilant. The breath radiating from his whole body instantly changed from peaceful to aggressive. The soldiers next to him were also on alert in an instant, and they quickly formed a defensive formation without his instructions, guarding the only carriage in the team. The princess sitting on the carriage was also shocked at this moment. She subconsciously hugged the small figure in the carriage, patted the back of the child in her arms, and whispered a little flusteredly in her mouth. "It's okay, you is not afraid. Mother is here. General Li and the others are very powerful. They will protect us. You is not afraid." Things that rushed down from Ping Shan were very fast, and Ping Shan was not so tall, so the guarded Li Sheng quickly saw what the things were rushing down. It seemed to be a figure, and it looked like a young man, with a miserable howl in his mouth, and he seemed to be tied with a thick rope, which fastened him to the mount below him. However, when he saw the appearance of the young man clearly, Li Sheng, as a bat-leadist general, couldn't help but be stunned at this time. Because under that young man's crotch, the mount he was riding was really something he had never seen before. It was not a horse or a strange animal, nor was it a treasure made by some warlocks, or a strange treasure was born by coincidence. Very common among many tea houses and restaurants, stools. That's right, it's the kind of four-legged long stool with a very simple workmanship. And the stool that the teenager rides is like a wild horse that has come alive, with 4 wooden legs constantly bending and running like a horse, but the feeling of bumps is definitely more exciting than riding on a horse. As the young man approached, not only Li Sheng, but most of the other soldiers also saw clearly what he looked like, and his unprecedented mount. Everyone suddenly felt a little astonished. However, whether it was Li Sheng or these soldiers, after Wei Wei felt a little astonished, he quickly reacted, raising his vigilance again in his heart. As a general, Li Sheng clenched the long knife in his hand at this time, with sharp eyes like a falcon, ready to slash forward with a knife at any time, and the killing intent on his body was looming. For him, no matter how funny the way the teenager is approaching, he has to guard against being so close at this time. If the opponent hasn't stopped when he approaches him, then he doesn't mind. Cut this young man with a single knife. The teenager who was wailing on the stool, saw the group of people in front of him, and seemed to realize something. The wailing in his mouth immediately turned into a hasty word. "I'm the warlock here to help." The general in front, "Stop for me, help. I saw this general in Zhou Heng, thank you for helping me just now." Li Sheng looked at this boy who was riding a stool and rushed to him, and now a young man who was saluting to him seriously, his brows wrinkled slightly. The boy in front of him was about 17 or 18 years old. Although there was no childishness on his face, he did not seem to be mature. The clothes on the body are not very good, but the clothes are decent, and the appearance is good. It is not the delicate type, but rather tough and masculine. For Li Sheng, who is a general, this is the case. He looked more pleasing to the eye. However, the young man named Zhou Heng in front of him was able to stand here and talk to him now, not because of his looks, but because when he was near just now, he showed that he was a warlock who came to help. Let Li Sheng keep his hands, risking him to get closer. But looking at the young man's age and the shallow mana fluctuations on his body, Li Sheng was not too optimistic about the warlock who came to support him. However, at this time, whether you are optimistic about the other party or not, it is always good to have a warlock coming to support you, especially now that the people they protect are in a very bad state and need to be treated more urgently, even if the young warlock is in front of you. It doesn't feel very reliable, and it's better than nothing. You said you were a warlock who came to support. What evidence do you have? Even though Li Sheng had decided in his heart that he wanted a dead horse to be used as a living horse doctor, he still did not relax his vigilance against the young man, facing Zhou in front of him. Heng asked. Certificate, this should be there. Hearing this, Zhou Heng stretched out his hand and fumbled on his body. After groping up and down to find that there was nothing, he put his hand into the slung bag on his body and fumbled in it. Seeing his movements, Li Sheng's eyes became alert, and his right hand was silently resting on the hilt of the knife, as if ready to attack at any time. With Li Sheng's insight, he certainly knew that most warlocks would have a messenger bag on their body, which contained various things they might use in their usual spell casting. Therefore, when a warlock is rummaging in front of you to find the things in the bag, you must not relax your vigilance at this time, because if one is not paying attention, it may be the way of the warlock. Under Li Sheng's vigilant gaze, Zhou Heng took out something from his shoulder bag, stretched out his hand to hand it out, and said to Li Sheng, "I found it, it should be this." Li Sheng looked at the things in Zhou Heng's hands, his eyes lit up slightly, he recognized what Zhou Heng's things were, and at the same time, his vigilance towards Zhou Heng was mostly gone. What Zhou Heng took out of his shoulder bag was a polished bamboo piece with some runes carved on it and some characters written on the other side. This thing Li Sheng happened to see, and it was called Huan En Ling. This was something that was created when the former master of Yu Kingdom was in power. At that time, it was to train as many warlocks as possible, and it was not hoped that after these warlocks benefited, Yu Guo could not get any feedback from them. Made such a thing. To briefly explain, some warlocks who have received the favor of Yu Kingdom or obtained something from Yu Kingdom owe the favor of Yu Kingdom. At a certain time, when Yu Kingdom encounters difficulties and begs them, they must offer to give a helping hand, This process of giving and repaying kindness is basically mandatory. This coercive method is this seemingly inconspicuous return order. This recorded the content that the sorcerer was helped by the kingdom of Yu at the beginning, and at the same time, the relationship that had to be repaid after receiving the help was stabilized through magic techniques. Zhou Heng took out the repaying order, so his origin should not be a big problem, but this repaying order was used less and less as early as the predecessor of Yu Kingdom. Zhou Heng, a young man, could not be the true holder of the repayment order. In all likelihood, he would repay the gratitude on behalf of others. Although the Huan Enling guaranteed that those warlocks who were favored at the time would surely repay the kindness of Yu Kingdom, there are always some warlocks who do not want to bear this kindness, and can use their own magic methods to unlock the effect of the return of grace, or graft its effect to others, and let others help themselves to repay the original kindness. Li Sheng is almost certain that Zhou Heng in front of him was repaid by others through grafting. When thinking about his appearance, the whole person was tied to that stool. This shows that he was involuntary, and when he took out the order, he didn't seem to know what it was, and it could be. It is further proved that he did come on behalf of others. After receiving the return order from Zhou Heng, Li Sheng directly read the text on the back. After reading the whole text, he couldn't help but secretly said a pity. The content recorded above is that a sorcerer has obtained a basic method for the practice of sorcerers from Yu Kingdom. With 2 spell-level spells, he promised that there will be a return in the future, and the time was more than 50 years ago. For more than 50 years, even if he was just an inexperienced warlock, he is definitely a master now. If it is the other party's knowledge and gratitude, it is the other party himself, then their next path will be easy to follow. Too much. With some regrets, he handed the return order to Zhou Heng, and Li Sheng asked him. Look at your cultivation level, you can reach the realm of practice, right? Are there any gods or spirits to worship? Zhou Heng sighed while accepting the repayment order. I could use the spirit that the master enshrined, but now, the friendship between the master and apprentice is exhausted. I don't know if I can borrow the power of the original spirit again. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhou Heng turned his head and looked at Ping Shan behind him. What happened there before appeared in his mind. More than half an hour before the time was pulled back, on Ping Shan, Zhou Heng Zheng stood motionless in place. Beside him, there was an old man dressed in a green shirt, who looked kind, also slung on his body. With a satchel. The old man was holding a too-thick hemp rope in his hand, while putting it around Zhou Heng's body, while pulling it over the long bench beside him. At the same time he was not idle in his mouth. Disciple, don't blame being a teacher, and being a teacher doesn't want to hurt you, but isn't this impossible? The kindness I owed back then came to my door, but now I have to pay it back, but now I am a teacher. At most, 20% to 30% of his skills are left, and he has no ability to go to this flood at all. As the saying goes, the master has something to do, and the disciple serves his work. At the beginning, he rescued you from a difficult situation for the teacher, and taught you for more than 2 years, taught you this ability, and now it should be time for you to repay you as a teacher. Furthermore, you are not the same as being a teacher. You are a native of Yu. What you have to do for the teacher this time is also related to the continuation of the next throne of Yu, so you helped the teacher to pay this back. Kindness can be regarded as contributing to the country. While you can repay the kindness of being a teacher, you can also contribute to the country. For you, that is a good thing with 2 birds with 1 stone. With a few words of effort, the old man had fastened Zhou Heng firmly to the long 4-corner stool, and then stood in front of him, watching Zhou Heng continue to speak. I originally wanted to make you a Trojan horse rune, so that you can ride a tall horse and be more powerful when you see people. However, if you encounter evil and delay on the road, you can only be wronged. But don't worry, disciple, the equestrian skill of the teacher has got its true meaning. Even if you use this long stool to cast spells, the effect will be discounted at best. While talking, the old man raised his hands, clasped his hands at the same time, and changed several techniques on his chest, and then a faint black light appeared on his hands, and then the black light quickly escaped. Between his hands, it faintly turned into the outline of a horse, and fell into the long stool. Immediately afterwards, the long four-legged stool under Zhou Heng seemed to suddenly come back to life. The four wooden legs actually moved around, as if they were about to run eagerly, but fortunately they were stopped by the old man. Zhou Heng, who was tied to a long stool, seemed to have accepted his fate at this time, and there was not much panic in his eyes, but there was not much depression. On the contrary, he appeared quite calm. Seeing Zhou Heng's appearance, the old man couldn't help but sighed slightly. He swallowed back what he wanted to say, and then said with some sincerity, "After this incident, the friendship between you and me is completely exhausted. Don't blame being a teacher. The world is like this. No one will treat you nicely for no reason. We should understand this truth best as a warlock. But that's it. I saved your life in the first place, but now you pay me back once. This is justified. Although it is dangerous, you have a special physique and you seem to have some secrets that your teacher doesn't know. Maybe you have a chance to survive. If you can really survive, in the future, when you and I meet as a master and apprentice, you will be a stranger over there, and you don't owe each other. The world is difficult and dangerous. I hope you will do it yourself in the future." These last few words, the old man is really a little sincere. After all, people are not grass and trees, together for a long time, there will be some feelings between each other. Zhou Heng listened to the old man's words, and there seemed to be slight emotional fluctuations in his eyes, but it was not very obvious. At this time, the old man did not pay attention to the mood swings in Zhou Heng's eyes. He just looked into the distance and looked at the line of faintly visible team, urging the spells he had just cast, making the long stools that cast the spells look like a living steed. It ran forward, faster and faster. At the same time, the old man had another seal in his hand, unlocking the magic spell that was imposed on Zhou Heng to restrict his activities. While unlocking this technique, the old man seemed to see a pair of eyes and glanced back at him. The things conveyed in those eyes made him feel a little lost for a moment. Standing in a daze, the old man shook his head and thought in his heart, "Impossible, if he had broken away from the spell early, he would be able to obediently protect me from the disaster." After shaking his head to overthrow the thought that had just appeared in his mind, the old man didn't stay here anymore, and quickly left. After some cross-examination by Li Sheng, Zhou Heng gave a general account of his experience, including the fact that he was pushed out by the previous master to prevent the disaster, and he did not hide it. There is nothing to conceal about this matter itself. When he appeared in front of Li Sheng, with a rope tied to his body, and the repayment order in his hand, he had basically clarified the matter. The weather is still hot. At the foot of Pingshan Mountain, there is a rare shady area. Zhou Heng and Li Sheng and a group of people are sitting here to rest. However, there is obviously a distance between Zhou Heng and the army. Obviously, Zhou Heng who just appeared, even if there is no problem with his inquiry, it is not so easy to win everyone's trust. They have important responsibilities during their trip, and they have gone through several dangers on the road, and each of them still has a string in their hearts. Zhou Heng can also understand these people's defenses against themselves, changing themselves into their positions, and will not easily believe in a stranger who suddenly appears, not to mention that this person is still a warlock. Sorcerer, simply explain it literally, it's a group of people who know how to use magic, and if you want to explain it carefully, it's not just a few words that can be said clearly. Most of the warlocks with low cultivation bases and no abilities can only get around in the market, even relying on scams and abductions to live, and powerful warlocks, throwing beans into soldiers, driving the clouds and fog, or living high in the temple to be in power, or Xiao Ao Hongchen was very moisturized. Zhou Heng has been in this world for more than 2 years, and he is already a warlock now, and only then has he slowly understood what a real warlock is. That's right, Zhou Heng is not from this world. He comes from another world. Zhou Heng himself doesn't know how to get to this world. It can only be said that it was an accident. After he came to this world, he found that he had become a thin young boy, starving, and after a while in this world like rootless duckweed, only then did he have such a glimmer of understanding of the world. This is a world similar to the ancient world of his previous life, with many similarities, but the two worlds are completely different. Relying on some of the benefits brought to this world by his previous life, when Zhou Heng had just got a little understanding of the world, he still felt that he could live in this world until he encountered evil for the first time. He almost died before he truly realized how dangerous the world was. Fortunately, he was rescued that time, that time, he worshipped a master and became a sorcerer. He followed the other side to practice for more than 2 years, learned a lot of things, and had a deeper understanding of the world. Awareness. Zhou Heng was very grateful for the master he had worshipped in this world, even if he knew that the purpose of the other party for accepting him was not simple, he still had a gratitude in his heart. To this day, being pushed by the opponent to guard against disasters, replacing the opponent to join this team that knew it would be very troublesome at first glance, Zhou Heng also recognized in his heart, it was nothing more than a kindness as the opponent said before. It's a pity that the first master he worshipped in this world, and the rare friendship between master and apprentice, has since disappeared. If there is a chance to meet in the future, the rest will only be embarrassing. Thinking of this in his mind, Zhou Heng also felt a little bit of loss, and at this moment, he saw the general who questioned him just now, walking in his direction with strides, and soon came to him. The drinking water in the army is insufficient. I wonder if the mage can solve the drinking water problem. Li Sheng looked at Zhou Heng and asked him. The art of collecting water and diverting water, these are all small art, almost every warlock can master it, if the general is at ease, of course there is no problem with it. Zhou Heng stood up and said. Then bother the mage. Li Sheng nodded. The vast majority of sorcerers have no fixed residences and walk around the world, so for the convenience of walking, almost every sorcerer of them can master such techniques as collecting water and diverting water. In addition, these small techniques, because of their simplicity of practice, are also the first techniques most sorcerers practice after enlightenment. Seeing Li Sheng nodded, Zhou Heng reached out and touched his satchel. He found 2 small bowls in the satchel around his waist. The 2 small bowls are made of ordinary materials, but at the bottom of the 2 small bowls, there is a line connected to connect the 2 small bowls together. After taking out these 2 small bowls, Zhou Heng squatted down again, digging out the soil under his feet with his hands, making a small hole about a foot, and then Zhou Heng took out the 2 bowls he just took out. One of them was placed upside down into the small pit. Li Sheng stood beside him, watching his movements carefully, while keeping his feet slightly apart, maintaining a posture that he could attack at any time. Li Sheng has also seen some sorcerers cast spells, but even when they cast the same spell, different sorcerers have slightly different methods. Just like this Zhou Heng in front of him, he seems to want to draw water, but the way he casts the spell, is very different from his former warlock. Zhou Heng buckled a bowl into the pit dug on the ground, then ran the mana that was not so deep in his body, pointed at the other bowl, and snorted softly. Get up! With his voice, the line connecting the bottom of the 2 bowls suddenly tightened, supporting the bowl upright above the opening. Afterwards, Zhou Heng covered one palm of his hand above the mouth of the bowl, and his other hand was printed on his chest, and then the hand covering the mouth of the bowl began to slowly lift up. And with this action of him, some clear water appeared out of thin air in the bowl. As the palm of his hand was raised higher and higher, the clear water in the bowl appeared faster and faster. When he moved his hand completely when I lifted it up, the bowl was already full of clear water, even overflowing. The soldiers around had also noticed Zhou Heng's spell casting a long time ago. At this moment, they saw that he had made some drinking water, and they were already dry, and they suddenly looked a little hot. However, Even if they felt dry mouth and tongue, none of these soldiers came forward, mainly because they had not received the order, and the time before they had to endure the thirst was not too long, and they could still bear it for the time being. Seeing the bowl that was still pouring water out after Zhou Heng retracted his hand, Li Sheng didn't hesitate to go forward, took a little water with his hand, and leaned to his mouth, sticking out his tongue to lick it. After a while, feeling that there was no problem, 2 more soldiers were called and asked them to start filling water with water bags. After more than 24 water bags were filled, water was still pouring out of the bowl. At this time, Li Sheng gave Zhou Heng a surprised look. He has seen several sorcerers who cast spells to fetch water, and he also knows a lot about sorcerers. According to Zhou Heng's cultivation base and the spells he used, he should produce so much water. At this time, Zhou Heng didn't explain anything, but after seeing so many water bags filled, he reached out and pointed at the bowl that was still pouring out of water, and the water in the bowl stopped immediately. Zhou Heng stretched out his hand and squeezed the bowl. In front of Li Sheng and the surrounding soldiers, he brought the bowl full of water to his lips, drank most of the water in it, and then again the other bowl buried in the soil was dug out, washed with the remaining water, and put it back in his shoulder bag. After doing all this, Zhou Heng smiled at Li Sheng and walked straight to the side. Li Sheng glanced at the wrinkle that went to one side, and then winked at the 2 soldiers who had just filled the water. The 2 soldiers took up 2 water bags and walked to the 2 horses resting on the side. The water in the water bag was fed to the 2 horses first. Of course, Zhou Heng noticed this. The expression on his face was calm, but his evaluation of these people was a lot higher. At the same time, he predicted that the difficulty of his task of preventing disasters on behalf of the teacher has risen again. He cast the spell in public just now, plus he took a sip first. This is to win everyone's trust. After all, an outsider who just joined, even if it seems that there is no problem, but he can't relax his vigilance so easily, especially the identity is still a warlock. After the 2 soldiers fed the water in the 2 water bags to the horses, after about a quarter of an hour, the 2 horses that drank the water did not have any abnormal reactions. At this time, Li Sheng asked some of the soldiers to start drinking water. Zhou Heng watched silently from the side and looked at these people carefully. Of course, he could not let go of the carriage that was protected in the middle of the team. This is the object of these people's protection, and it is also what he needs to replace his master. Task. Although he is here now, Zhou Heng only has a general understanding of what he needs to accomplish this time. Now the effect of Huaninling has been grafted onto Zhou Heng's body. If he wants to complete the task, he must quickly understand the whole thing, know what the difficulties and dangers are, and how strong the resistance is. At the same time how strong one's own power is, only this can give oneself more vitality. You have to find a way to quickly integrate into them, and really make them trust me, so that you can figure everything out. Zhou Heng looked at the carriage and thought in his heart at the same time. But at this time, Li Sheng walked in front of Zhou Heng in a big stride this time, and said to him, "I believe you for the time being. I really am a warlock who came to help. His Royal Highness is injured. The warlock has died in battle. Although your cultivation level is not high, you may not be able to help, but now there are no other warlocks. Come with me to see His Royal Highness." Hearing Li Sheng's words, Zhou Heng immediately stood up, walked to the carriage while following him, and stopped by the carriage. After Li Sheng reported to the people inside, Zhou Heng boarded carriage. A group of about 100 people rested in Pingshan for a while, and when the temperature was not as hot as before, they started on the road again. Compared with just now, this time there is one more warlock in the team. Even if it is just a low-level cultivation realm warlock, it seems to give these soldiers a little more hope, and their morale has increased a lot. At the very least, after having a warlock, everyone no longer needs to worry about the problem of no drinking water on the road again. When resting at night, there is no need to worry about encountering some evil approaching and failing to notice. The temperature dropped a bit, and coupled with a good rest, the team moved forward a lot faster than before. After passing Pingshan, we are close to the boundary of our country Yu. It will not take long before we can get out of this deserted area. Tonight, we estimate that we will still spend the night here. It is very likely that we will encounter evil. This is going to bother the mage. In the front of the team, Li Sheng and Zhou Heng rode one after another, and Li Sheng said to Zhou Heng who was walking behind him, "This is necessary." After hearing this, Zhou Heng spoke very simply. The place where they are now is the buffer zone between the Yu and Qi countries. It is called a borderline wasteland. It is a loess all year round, the land is very barren, and there is a little drought and water shortage, so few people usually know how to do it. Activities in this area do not belong to either of the two countries. It is a wilderness in itself, and because it is the border area between the two countries, there have been several wars between the two countries in the past. Therefore, this wasteland can be regarded as a battlefield with many corpses buried. The wilderness and the battlefield will inevitably breed some evils, which may be attacked at night and have to be guarded. When Zhou Heng first came into this world, he thought it was the ghosts and monsters in the legends of the previous life. Although he was a little afraid, he felt that he might not be able to deal with the fuse brought by the previous life. But when he really saw the evil in this world, Zhou Heng discovered that although the fortunes brought by the previous life were good, it was really not so easy to deal with the evil in this world. Zhou Heng has a trace of the blood of the witch clan, which was awakened before passing through his previous life. This trace of blood was brought to this world by him. This is the blessing brought by him from the past life, and it is also the first time he felt that he could be in the world. The confidence of this world to settle down. Although there is not much information about the inheritance in his thin blood of the witch clan, Zhou Heng still understands the power of the witch clan with such insignificant information about the inheritance. Just such a very weak blood of the witch clan has already brought Zhou Heng a lot of benefits. More than 2 years ago, part of the reason why he was able to apprentice smoothly was also because his previous master was saving after getting off him. He discovered that his physique was a bit extraordinary, and he was able to apprentice so smoothly with an inquiring mind. The only pity is that Zhou Heng's inheritance information is too little. Apart from knowing that he is of the blood of the witch clan, he has also obtained a method to absorb the earth's stale air, and there is almost nothing else. That trace of the blood of the witch clan brought Zhou Heng's greatest change. It greatly strengthened his physique, making him far higher than ordinary people, surpassing many warlocks, whether it is power, speed or physical defense. Even the warrior. As for the cultivation talent in the art of magic, Zhou Heng is not sure whether it has anything to do with the blood of the witch clan on his body. There may be some bonuses in this respect. He does not have any obvious feelings about it now. The current cultivation base does not have the ability to explore this. Riding on the horse, chatting with Li Sheng without a word, Zhou Heng also basically figured out what happened before Li Sheng and others, and the danger he might face next. Based on what he had known before and what he now learned from Li Sheng, Zhou Heng reorganized the specific content of his mission. The world he lives in nowadays is a world full of many countries. The country where Zhou Heng and his previous masters are located is the country of Yu, a country with fairly good strength, and the area of the country is about half the size of the country where he was in his previous life. From left to right, in this world, the overall strength of the Yu kingdom can be regarded as inadequate and more than inferior. There is a country close to Yu kingdom named Qi, which is stronger than Yu kingdom and has a larger land area than Yu kingdom. There have been many frictions between the two countries in the past. Because although there is a gap in each other's strength, the gap is not so large that it is irreparable, so there are wins and losses between each other. About 10 years ago, there was a battle between the kingdom of Yu and the kingdom of Qi. Yu was defeated. In order not to shake the foundation of the country, he could only choose peace talks. The final result was compensation and then sent protons, thus bringing the two countries to a truce. The proton who was sent to Qi state for the first time was the object of Li Sheng's escort, the injured His Royal Highness in the carriage. Sending protons back to the country is of course not that simple. The main reason for Yu Kingdom's special trip to bring the protons back from Qi Kingdom is that the current monarch of Yu Kingdom is about to die. The original monarch still had many heirs. However, due to various reasons over the years, the children of Yu's current monarch basically died. This means that if King Ren returns to the royal capital, he will become the crown prince in all likelihood, and it is very likely that he will inherit the throne of Yu Kingdom. Bringing the protons of one's own country from another country is certainly not a simple matter. Not to mention that before Li Sheng and the others arrived, the state of Yu had already made efforts to persuade those in power in Qi to let them agreeing to release protons back to the country. I don't know how much it cost. During Li Sheng's journey back home to protect Proton, he has already experienced several attacks. Some pretended to be gangsters to besiege and kill them. Some also wanted to ambush them with the advantage of terrain. There were also some warlocks who secretly performed spells to use magic spells to directly kill the king of Nene. Li Sheng can deal with the frontal conflict with his troops. But in the face of some weird spells, it is difficult for Li Sheng to take care of it. Thanks to the powerful warlocks in the team before, he has been able to reduce the dangers many times. It is a pity that the previous ones during the First World War, the original warlock in the team was accidentally killed by the opponent's deliberate targeting. After understanding this information, Zhou Heng, who was riding on a horse, was still chatting with Li Sheng without a word, but he had already quickly figured it out in his heart. The several battles Li Sheng and the others have encountered before were all in the territory of Qi, and it is estimated that they mainly came from the side of Qi. After all, although Qi high-level power holders, thanks to the efforts of the Kingdom of Yu, agreed to release the King Ren and let him be welcomed back to the Kingdom of Yu again, there will inevitably be some people among them who do not want to let the King of Ren go back. It is just their opinions. It has not been adopted. It is also possible that those who promised to be in power in the Qi state, the previous promise was only on the surface, and the real intention was not to allow King Ren to return to the Kingdom of Yu. But no matter what, after passing the border and wasteland, the danger from the Qi country can almost be relaxed, although there may be attacks from the Qi country next, but the number of people will definitely not be too many. The next thing to consider is that after entering Yu Kingdom, those who are in Yu Kingdom and don't want King Ren to come back. The sons of the current country lord have almost died in recent years. Some of them are indeed accidents, but if they are all accidents, I am afraid to say it out. Among those villagers who don't know a big character, few people believe it. All the children of the current lord have died. Who should inherit the throne of Yu? Of course, those people who belonged to the royal bloodline were at least one of the members of the Zhong clan to inherit the throne of Yu Kingdom. Zhou Heng came to this world for 3 years at most, and spent more than 2 years with his former master. Although he became more and more familiar with the world, he understood the situation of the upper echelons of Yu Kingdom. However, it is not very clear. After all, in such an environment similar to ancient times, the transmission and acquisition of information is a big problem for ordinary people. Therefore, from the information he possessed, he was unable to specifically determine the specific dangers that he would face after arriving in the territory of Yu Kingdom. In this regard, he could find time to analyze it with Li Sheng. In addition to these conceivable sources of danger, there may also be unpredictable dangers on the next journey, which come from various emergencies and evils. These can only be carefully prevented, and after the encounter, we can find a way to solve it. There is no other way, especially the evil thing, it is impossible to predict when it will be encountered inexplicably. This kind of unpredictable thing, compared with the already foreseeable danger, the threat will not be lower, but it may be more terrifying. It's nothing more than encountering common evils. If you encounter that kind of very powerful ones, it will really be bad luck. However, in places where there are crowds of people, under normal circumstances, you encounter that kind of particularly powerful evils. The possibility of difference is not big, and there is no need to worry too much. Sorting out these things clearly in my mind, the time has passed. Seeing that the sun has set in the west and night is about to fall, the team should find a place to rest temporarily. Going at night is not only inefficient, but also encounters evil. The possibility will be great. Under Li Sheng's arrangement, the team stopped before dark, found a relatively flat place, and prepared to camp here temporarily. Some people scattered around, looking for something to burn, prepared to light a few pairs of bonfires, and walked around by the way to see if there were any potential undiscovered dangers, while the rest began to use limited conditions and try their best create an environment that is convenient for rest. Zhou Heng noticed that Li Sheng turned his gaze to him at this time, and he was not surprised. He directly reached out and took out two things from his bag and handed them to Li Sheng. This vermilion rope can surround the camp, but it's only 20 meters, which shouldn't be enough. I still have a few strange charms that can be pasted around. Li Sheng took two things, glanced at the bag on Zhou Heng's waist, and then said with a light smile, "A lot of times I want to know how many things are in your warlock's bag." Hearing this, Zhou Heng just smiled faintly, and did not answer. Li Sheng is definitely not the first person to ask this question: how many things are in a warlock's bag? Many people in this world want to know, including some warlocks, as well as other warlocks' waist bags. What was installed? Some people say that the warlock's satchel is actually a treasure bag, which can hold many things. It seems to be a normal size, but it is actually bigger than a house. Others felt that the satchel on the warlock was the legendary void mustard seed. It was basically another piece of space, so it could store a lot of things, and it was the treasure of every warlock. In the face of these speculations, every true warlock would never answer directly. The most standard reaction is to laugh without saying a word, like Zhou Heng. In fact, the real reason behind this smile, apart from the warlock, really few people can understand. When Zhou Heng first started to learn art from his master, he was extremely curious about the bag on the warlock's body. He felt that it should be the spatial magic weapon described in many novels in the previous life. But after he really got a bag and was told the real secret of the warlock bag by his former master, Zhou Heng was disappointed, because everything was not what he thought, and most people's guesses were also fundamental. Sorry. For most warlocks, the satchel on their backs is actually just an ordinary satchel. The real reason why so many things can be taken out of it is not the satchel, but the warlock himself. The first thing that Zhou Heng learned from the master after enlightening the spirit was not actually a magic trick, but learning tricks. The main thing is to hide things in the body without being discovered. This is the real secret of the sorcerer's bag. Of course, that small satchel can't hold so many things. Almost all warlock satchels can hold so many things, mainly because some of the things are in other places on their bodies, and the satchels are just a cover. Of course, not all warlocks' satchels are ordinary. For those capable or more powerful warlocks, the satchels they carry may really have the effect of being able to hold many things, or even there are some other functions. But as far as Zhou Heng is concerned, the bag on his body is just an ordinary bag. For this, Zhou Heng doesn't mind now, because many things exist naturally because of their reason, just like the behavior of a warlock who pretends to be mysterious. In fact, it also has its reason. Zhou Heng once consulted his previous master, and the answer he got was habit, but after he had learned something about it, he had a different view on it. The inheritance of warlocks can be traced back to tribal wizards and sacrifices in ancient times, but they have not always been very prosperous. In some periods, they have also experienced suppression by some in power. Many times inheritance is a problem. Warlocks are mixed in all directions, although there are some methods, but in fact, many sorcerers with low cultivation levels don't have much power to protect themselves, so they can only pretend to be mysterious and add more mystery to themselves. Another point is to protect one's wealth and make people believe that the most valuable things of warlocks are in their shoulder bags, so that some people who want to take wealth will target the warlock's shoulder bags. Also, the warlock carries a satchel on his body, and at some critical moments when confronted with others, it can often have unexpected effects. The enemy will pay attention to the satchel on the warlock. At this time, he may ignore the sudden display of the warlock from other places on the body. The whole card of the turn. As a sorcerer in the realm of practice, Zhou Heng has practiced sorcery for more than 2 years. He is indeed just a rookie, so there is not much in his bag. The ones that came out before, plus the ones that I took out just now, are already most of them, and there is really not much left. As for whether there are any good things in his body, the answer is of course no. A warlock who has studied for more than 2 years can have any good things in his body. A group of soldiers were very dexterous. With everyone's cooperation, the camp was quickly set up, and 3 fires were lit in the camp. In this wasteland, because it is relatively desolate, there are not many things that can burn. Dry branches and the like are very common in other places, and they are not so easy to find here, so these hundreds of people the team can only produce these 3 fires, so everyone can make do with it a little bit. In addition, the vermilion rope surrounding the camp is only 20 meters long. With some strange charms, there is not much room to enclose it, so everyone can only squeeze as much as possible. Night came quickly and completely. This red rope and a few talismans surrounded it to form a simple camp. Although it could not give people much sense of security, it was better than nothing, so there was no need to worry about evil. Everyone can't reflect the difference in approach. Surrounded by the fire, Zhou Heng looked up at the bright moon rising in the sky, and then looked at the surrounding environment. At this time, he felt an inexplicable feeling, some lonely, some sadness, and others were unclear. Thing. At this moment, someone next to him handed him a piece of dry food, and Zhou Heng subconsciously reached out and took it. He just wanted to say thank you, but the other side ignored him, and then distributed dry food to other soldiers. Zhou Heng lowered his head and glanced at the dry food he received. This was a hard dry cake. Judging from the feel of the hand, most people couldn't bite. Looking at the soldiers around, they had already taken out the water bag and began to swallow the dry food in their hands with difficulty. Seeing everyone's movements, Zhou Heng also took out some water and began to settle the dry food he had allocated. To be honest, he is really hungry now. Although the sorcerer masters various magical techniques, most of the sorcerers still have to eat. Maybe a warlock with a higher cultivation level can get rid of the need for food, but Zhou Heng has not seen such a person yet, nor can his previous masters. The dry food in my hand is hard, but when it really tastes, it is not as unpalatable as expected. Of course, it can't taste very good, because there is no taste at all. While solving the dry food in his hand, Zhou Heng suddenly felt that someone was by his side. He turned around and found that Li Sheng was standing next to him again, just about to speak, but he saw Li Sheng take the initiative to speak. His Royal Highness Neo is awake, I want to thank you. Hearing Li Sheng's words, Zhou Heng temporarily put away half of the dry food, then stood up and followed Li Sheng to the carriage. Beside the carriage, the little boy in the carriage is now squatting there, seeming to be picking up stones on the ground. The princess in the carriage, looking at him through the carriage window, has been staring at him to prevent he ran elsewhere. As soon as Zhou Heng and Li Sheng came over, the little boy immediately stood up and ran back into the carriage again, looking a little afraid of life. Zhou Heng and Li Sheng walked closer, and before they could speak, they heard a slightly weak voice coming from the carriage. General Li, and this mage, you are here. As this voice sounded, the figure of King Ren, who had been treated by Zhou Heng before, with the support of the princess on the side, got off the carriage with some difficulty and looked at both Zhou Heng and Li Sheng. I have seen His Royal Highness Neo. Zhou Heng and Li Sheng both saluted at the same time. You two are welcome. I still want to thank both of you. General Li escorted me all the way to this point. During this period, after several battles, the mage had just arrived and saved my life. I am really grateful to both of you. After I return to the capital there must be a big report. Neo squeezed a smile on his pale face and said in a weak voice. Although the poison on his body was resolved, he lost a lot of blood accordingly, and his injuries had not fully recovered, so he appeared weak at this time. However, despite his weakness, Neo felt very sincere, humble, and polite, and he did not put on any airs because of his identity. In the following conversations, His Royal Highness Niang even showed the attitude of a courteous corporal. It was obvious that he was able to draw the two of them together, and he grasped a very suitable degree. At the same time, Li Sheng and Zhou Heng would not feel any discomfort. Although Zhou Heng did not directly agree to Neo's show of wooing, he still gave some intimacy, and he did not lose the face of Neo. Although he was sure, even if he lost the face of the other party would do it. Yun Danfan lightly exposed the matter at will. During a brief conversation with the Royal Highness, Zhou Heng could vaguely feel that, on the surface, the Highness of King Ren seemed to have a very good temper and a very kind temperament, but he should actually be a person who is very good at tolerance and understands. A person who judges the situation. As a proton of a country, living in a foreign country for so long, even because of his status, Qi will not put his life in danger, but some shame and blindness are absolutely indispensable. In that kind of environment, even if Neo was a person who didn't understand anything, he should gradually learn how to protect himself in that kind of environment and make himself as comfortable as possible. Therefore, the King Ren, who has been in a foreign country for so long, will definitely not really be a very gentle person, at least he will be a very forbearing person. Zhou Heng did not intend to take refuge in the King of Nene, but his main task was to the other party to the royal capital on the next journey, so there is no need to make the relationship very stiff, even if you deal with it temporarily, it is better than direct refuse. Let's deal with it for a while, at least in the next journey, let His Royal Highness more trust in Zhou Heng, and also lessen some internal disharmony that may occur. The night was getting darker. After eating the dry food, all the soldiers, except for a few night watchmen, began to surround the bonfire and closed their eyes to rest. Here in the wasteland, the temperature is very high during the day, but at night, it is still slightly colder. Fortunately, this environment is better than the desert. The temperature between day and night is not too exaggerated. Zhou Heng sat cross-legged by the fire, closed his eyes tightly, his chin drooped slightly, but his chest and abdomen did not see any ups and downs, as if he had no breath. Zhou Heng at this time, of course, is cultivating at this time of the night. The fundamental method he practices is called the resting method. During the cultivation, the whole person will enter an extremely quiet state, and he is improving himself. At the same time of mana, the functioning of the body will become very slow, and it will become very sensitive to the surrounding things. In the range of about 20 meters, Zhou Heng can feel any slight wind and grass. After studying with the previous master for more than 2 years, even if Zhou Heng has a very good talent, he is also diligent and eager to learn, and learned a lot of things, but in the end the time for practice is still a little short, and many masters accept apprentices. Unless it is a real successor, they are accustomed to keeping a hand, and will not teach great skills immediately. Zhou Heng, who is currently in the realm of practice, has performed very well since his appearance, but in fact, the number of spells he has mastered is not very large. Most of them are small skills. In addition to the fundamental methods of cultivation, there are only 2 real spells. That is to say, Zhou Heng knows the importance of the foundation. After studying for more than 2 years before following, in addition to the opportunity to learn spells, the other time is to lay a solid foundation as much as possible to master what the warlock needs. Some of the basic knowledge is very firm. The sorcerers in this world are very different from the cultivators in the myths and legends of the previous lives. The cultivators in the myths and legends of the previous lives pay attention to cultivating immortals and asking questions and pursuing the Tao in the dark. When Zhou Heng was studying with his previous master, he never heard his master say how to seek the Tao. The ideas taught to him were all pragmatism, and he pursued not the unconscious Tao, or the pursuit of more powerful skills. Law, master a more powerful force. Under this concept, the spells mastered by sorcerers are very practical and have all kinds of magical and weird effects. According to conditions such as power and practicality, the levels of spells are also very clearly divided. The lowest level is a small technique, like the water diversion technique used by Zhou Heng before. The level is just a small technique. Spells at the level of minor spells usually have very limited power. When they are cast, they may have to use some tools, which have certain restrictions. However, the effects of small techniques are varied, covering almost all aspects. In real use, the actual effects are very large. Above the minor skill, that is the level of the spell. This level of magic is more powerful. Of course, the difficulty of cultivation is also more difficult than that of the minor spell. Above the magic, it is Taoism, the power is greater, and the difficulty of cultivation is of course higher. Certain Taoism, there are some conditions for cultivation, not every sorcerer can practice. It is called supernatural power that is more powerful than Taoism. This is a height that Zhou Heng cannot reach for the time being. Even his previous masters can't reach the level of supernatural power. For the time being, he has nothing to do with this level of magic. Understood? In addition to the level of spells, there is actually a certain realm for the mastery of a spell, which is generally divided into 4 realms. The first is getting started. If you can release a spell, then it can be considered getting started. Then there is the realm of proficiency, mastering this technique very proficiently and being able to use it skillfully, this is mastery. Going up is to understand its true meaning. The mastery of this magic technique has reached a very deep level. You understand the law of the operation of the magic technique, truly understand its true meaning, and you will be more arbitrary when you use it, and you can even control it. It is slightly modified. After the true meaning, there is tracing to the source, which transcends the limitations of the magic technique itself and can be traced back to the origin of the magic technique at a deeper level, so that it is possible to master the realm of a higher level of magic technique. For example, after practicing a small technique to the level of tracing its origin, it is very possible to trace its origin and comprehend a spell with similar effects. Because there is a magical realm at the level of traceability, some sorcerers believe that all the lower level spells in this world are actually split or simplified from higher level spells, so they have mastered them. To a certain extent, it can restore a higher level spell. Zhou Heng currently masters a small number of spells, and the most profound ones have only reached the level of proficiency. There is no magic method that can get its true meaning, so the next level is for him. It's still too far. What he has to do now is to continue to improve his cultivation level, first complete the task of repaying grace on behalf of the master, and then pursue other things. Zhou Heng was running the weak mana, trying his best to increase the mana in the body, and at the same time, his own perception diverged, paying attention to the wind and grass around him. The surroundings now seem to be very quiet, but in the current state of Zhou Heng's cultivating the fundamental law, he can perceive and hear a lot of noisy sounds. The sound of more than 100 people breathing, the sound of burning flames, and the sound of wind blowing, everything of this kind is quiet and lively. Zhou Heng could even feel that as the night got deeper and deeper, the temperature of the passing cool breeze became lower and lower, and the flames of several bonfires rising in the camp were not very strong because of the lack of combustible materials. Suddenly, Zhou Heng felt someone walking, and then he opened his eyes, and then he saw the soldiers who had been in charge of vigilance, waking up the soldiers who were sleeping, and taking turns to rest. Seeing that this was the case, Zhou Heng closed his eyes again and continued to enter the state of cultivation. About half an hour later, Zhou Heng opened his eyes again. This time he stood up directly, and then looked around. He felt that there seemed to be something around him, approaching under the cover of darkness. Around the camp, there is no problem with the circle surrounded by vermilion rope. The rope does not react at all, and the rest of the place with strange signs is also unchanged, but Zhou Heng just thinks that there must be something is approaching. Running the mana in his body, Zhou Heng stretched out both hands at the same time, and then simultaneously raised his hands to his eyes, and whispered softly in his mouth. "Open your eyes." With his hands passing in front of his eyes, Zhou Heng's eyes seemed to be covered with a thin layer of green, just like the eyes of a wild beast, glowing with a faint light at night. The pupils were covered with a thin green layer of Zhou Heng. When he looked around again, the sight that he could see clearly in the dark night was much clearer than before. This is one of the effects of eye-opening surgery. Although this technique is a small technique, it is also one of the small techniques that almost every sorcerer must learn and master, just like water gathering and diversion, because it allows the sorcerer to see it. Some things that ordinary people can't see, such as invisible evil. Zhou Heng has already cultivated this technique to the level of proficiency, which is considered to be the more advanced among the techniques he has mastered. After performing the eye-opening operation, Zhou Heng looked around again, and some abnormalities soon occurred. In his eyes, the surroundings changed from pitch black to black and white. In this black and white, there were also a few very inconspicuous breaths, and it was obvious that something really approached. After confirming that there might be an evil approach, Zhou Heng didn't care about waking up everyone around him. He directly pulled out a few pieces of burning wood from the fire in front of him, and then threw the wood out vigorously. The burning wood passed through the darkness and was thrown out by him for more than 10 meters. It finally fell on the ground without causing any changes. However, the wood with flames allowed Zhou Heng to see the surrounding situation more clearly. Vaguely, Zhou Heng seemed to see a figure, which should have a human shape, but his body seemed to be a bit broken, and his body seemed to be stained with blood. He didn't see the figure very clearly. After the flames flickered, the figure disappeared. When Zhou Heng saw this figure, it was now completely certain that they had definitely encountered evil. Following his actions just now, many soldiers in the camp have been awakened by him now, and Li Sheng has already come to him, holding a long knife in his hand, with a trace of murderous aura on his body. "Did you encounter evil?" Li Sheng asked softly. Hearing this, Zhou Heng nodded slightly. "Is it great?" Li Sheng narrowed his eyes, and then continued to ask. "It's not clear yet, but judging from the fact that it has not been used directly, it should not be too powerful. It can appear in the wasteland here. It should be more than quiet. I guess it may be a resentment level evil. There are generals. If you are careful, you can handle it." Zhou Heng replied. "Resentment level, that's okay." Li Sheng heard that, the pressure in his heart was slightly reduced, but he didn't take it lightly. After all, when you encounter evil, no matter what level it is, you must not be careless, because you don't know at all. What kind of method will you use to attack the evil you encounter? Zhou Heng glanced around again, and no trace of evil was found again, but at this time, the few firewoods with flames he had just thrown out suddenly went out at the same time, and then the vermilion around the camp, the rope and the sense of strange talisman burned almost at the same time. It was at this moment that Li Sheng swung a long knife to the front suddenly, and there was a burst of hot energy around his body. Zhou Heng followed closely behind him and threw out a few talismans. Almost at the same time when the two attacked, the burning bonfires in the camp were extinguished at this moment, and the surrounding environment was almost plunged into darkness. The long knife that Li Sheng wielded with a sharp knife light cut out an invisible knife energy, spreading forward for several meters. The talisman that Zhou Heng threw with his hand was still very fast when he threw it out, and flexibly turned in the air, and flew towards the opposite direction of the talisman that Zhou Heng threw, as if there were the effect of tracking is the same as moving with the target. But before these few talisman flew far, the speed suddenly slowed down, and then they even fell to the ground without any response at all. Zhou Heng, who used the eye-opening technique, did not pay attention to the few talismans that had fallen down. When his eyes were burning on the scarlet string and the strange talisman around the camp, he clearly saw a shadow, and he had entered the camp and got into the crowd. The bonfire suddenly went out and the surroundings plunged into darkness. Naturally, the soldiers in the camp would fall into subconscious chaos in an instant. After all, in the dark environment, most people would feel some discomfort. At this time, Zhou Heng heard the sound of weapons unsheathed one after another, and there were even several sounds of weapons colliding. "Don't panic, open the school field for training!" Li Sheng immediately yelled. His voice was like a thunder, and the soldiers around him panicked, instantly, as if he had found a backbone and knew what to do next. Almost for the first time, the soldiers who were initially a little flustered took the weapons in their hands one after another, and then moved a distance apart, one by one about 2 meters apart, standing still in a defensive posture. At the same time, Zhou Heng was not idle at all. He quickly changed a few tactics in his hand, then crossed his hands and opened it like a lotus, with a cluster of flames beating on each finger. As his fingers opened quickly, the flames left his fingers and flew around, floating in midair. Although these flames looked inconspicuous, as if they were just the flames burning on candles, the light they emitted was very bright, with only 10 faint flames completely illuminating the surroundings of the camp. Open flame technique is also just a small technique, and its purpose is to ignite and illuminate, but in the dark environment, it can often produce good results. The surroundings of the camp became brighter again, and the hearts of these soldiers became more calm. After Zhou Heng's gaze swept across the audience quickly, he didn't even find any trace of the evil that rushed into the camp just now. With his eye-opening technique, he could only see a vaguely aura permeating the surroundings. Lifting his foot and immediately walked to the carriage, Zhou Heng stretched out his hand from the shoulder bag at his waist, and took out another sensation talisman, and brought it close to the carriage. The talisman did not burn, which made Zhou Heng's heart certain. Fortunately, Xia Yi didn't seem to enter the carriage. Looking back, Zhou Heng glanced at Li Sheng, who had a sharp gaze at this time, like a falcon, and found that the other party's gaze also looked over immediately. He knew that he could only rely on himself if he wanted to find out the evil. Zhou Heng recalled what he had learned from his previous master, and several experiences of following each other to get rid of evil and strange things, and he quickly calculated it in his heart. Evils are very scary things in this world. They are weird and terrifying existences, which are difficult to deal with by ordinary means. Even the lowest level of you must be very careful when encountering them, because you don't even know what kind of existence the evil you encountered, and how it will launch an attack. However, as the main force for dealing with evils, the warlocks, in the process of continuously dealing with all kinds of evils, relying on wisdom and continuous exploration, have also summed up a lot of experience. In the face of those evils that are difficult to see through seeing Zhang, the key to dealing with is to find out their bodies and let them show up. If the general position can be determined, the way to hide the body is actually nothing more than that. Either invisibility, change, or possession, etc., that's all. Of course, there are some more powerful, weird methods that can make your own sense of existence disappear. Even if you stand in front of you, you might be subconscious. Ignore it. The evil of the resentment level is unlikely to have the ability to be so strange that it is difficult to deal with. It is possible that it is still some ordinary means. Among all the magic techniques that Zhou Heng mastered, there is no means that can quickly find them out. In this case, one can only adopt a relatively stupid method, which is to hold the strange talisman one by one. It's close to the test. A few steps came to Li Sheng's side. Zhou Heng quickly explained his meaning to him. Li Sheng nodded immediately after listening. Zhou Heng's current performance seemed very ordinary to Li Sheng, but considering that the opponent was only a magician in the realm of practice, there was no way to ask too much, and it would be good to be able to solve the problem. Fortunately, these were his corporals who were present, and now they all obeyed his orders, standing apart one by one and standing still. It is easy to check. The two of them started to approach the soldiers one by one. Zhou Heng walked in front with a sense of strange charm in his hand, while Li Sheng leaned back slightly, holding a long knife in his hand, ready to discover the evil. And immediately slashed. As Zhou Heng took the strange charm and passed by the soldiers standing in place, the strange charm in his hand remained unchanged until he was about to reach the end of these people. Zhou Heng approached a Wei when the soldiers lowered their heads, the strange talisman in their hands suddenly burned. And at this time, the soldier who had been standing there quietly with his head down, suddenly raised his head, his neck stretched directly, and his head stretched out to the back, as if his neck suddenly broke. At this time, Zhou Heng suddenly felt a sense of hatred in his heart, which surged from the depths of his heart, and a picture suddenly appeared in his mind. It was a battlefield in a piece of yellow land. It should be a scene after the end of a great war. There were broken limbs and broken arms everywhere, as well as broken weapons and flags. The bright red blood gathered from the corpses. Large tracts of loess were stained red. Among this pile of corpses, there is actually a soldier who has not completely died of breath. His limbs are mutilated and his strength is used up. The blood is constantly flowing out of the wounds on his body, taking away his life little by little. He was struggling to get a chance to survive. At this time, no matter if it was his own or the enemy, it would be good for anyone to find him, but unfortunately, there is not even one around him now. Gradually, he became a little desperate. The desire to survive in his heart, as if under the instigation of a voice, slowly transformed into a hatred. The dead bodies around him seemed to have suddenly come back to life. Ruaohu's voice yelled and screamed, telling their resentment. At the end of the screen, Zhou Heng saw the figure struggling on the battlefield. He was already lying there still, but his eyes were wide open. A pair of godless pupils seemed to be watching him and had become in the dead pupils, gradually filled with bloodshot eyes. Under the gaze of these pupils, Zhou Heng felt that the hatred in his heart became more and more profound, and he even had an urge to shoot immediately and attack everything around him. However, this kind of hatred was still within the range he could bear, and Zhou Heng was also prepared early, and would not be suddenly controlled by this impulse. Originally, there were hundreds of people, and they checked one by one, and there was no response from the previous ones. Then the evil and strangeness can only be hidden in the last few soldiers. At this time, if you still don't raise your vigilance, then it's true. Somewhat silly. Zhou Heng was able to hold back the hatred in his heart, but it didn't mean that the soldiers on both sides could hold back the hatred. The two rays of cold swords slashed towards Zhou Heng's neck at the same time, and they were also in sync with the time when the evil was discovered. Everything happened in an instant. As a class of people who master various powerful magic techniques, most of them have better physical fitness than ordinary people. Under the premise of not using magic techniques, the low-level warlocks face close range. His swords and slashes also had to end in a dead end. In the face of such a short distance and such a quick attack, Zhou Heng was also affected by evil. If he were to be a magician in the general practice realm, if there was no one around him, he might actually be caught by the opponent's hand. However, Zhou Heng's situation is obviously different. By his side, there is the existence of Li Sheng, and he has the blood of the witch clan, and his body is far stronger than ordinary warlocks. At the first moment, Zhou Heng didn't choose to step back and avoid, but quickly stretched out his hand and grabbed the wrists of the two soldiers on the left and right. Li Sheng behind him, the long knife had already been shot, but the knife originally intended to help Zhou Heng parry. After discovering that Zhou Heng could cope with it, he immediately rushed forward and slashed directly at the evil. The long sword with a sharp blade of energy, without hesitation, slashed the evil spirit directly in half, and then a somewhat illusory shadow appeared from the body that was cut in half, quickly pounced towards Zhou Heng. This figure was broken and bloodstained. It was clearly the evil appearance that Zhou Heng first saw. At such a close distance, seeing Xia Yi rushing towards him, Zhou Heng didn't see the slightest panic on his face, he just opened his mouth and screamed. Upbraid. This sound was very strong, like the roar of mountains and rivers, the earth beating drums, and there was an indescribable force in it, deep and heavy, and majestic. The evil spirit who originally pounced on Zhou Heng, under this loud shout, seemed to hit a more terrifying force, and was directly beaten and flew out. While it was flying upside down, it was hit by several fierce vigorous attacks one after another in the air, slashing its original illusory figure to make it even more illusory. For the first time, Zhou Heng saw how a powerful military commander dealt with an evil. The attack method was violent and brutal, leaving no room for the opponent. As he flew the evil spirit out, Li Sheng, who was originally behind him, suddenly rushed out, and the hot aura on his body combined with the killing intent on his body, unfolded wildly and fiercely. Attack! The long knife in his hand hacked frantically, and the light of the knife firmly enveloped the evil. Even if every attack, the evil caused by the evil is not very fatal, but after a few stabs, the evil is still complete. It became nothingness and disappeared. When Li Sheng stopped and he stood with a knife, the murderous aura and blazing aura on his body began to slowly recede, and everything actually only took a few breaths of time. From discovering the evil to solving it, the process seemed very fast, and it didn't seem to be that dangerous, but without Zhou Heng's loud shout, things would not be as simple as it is now. After receiving the sword, Li Sheng looked back at Zhou Heng, meaning to ask him, the warlock, whether the evil has been completely resolved. Although he also has considerable confidence in his own strength, he is still very confident in this way. In matters, it is better to listen to the warlock. However, when Li Sheng turned his head, he saw Zhou Heng pressing the two soldiers who attacked him to the ground with both hands. No matter how hard the two soldiers struggled, they were unable to break free from Zhou Heng's power and were completely held firmly by him. The suppressed. Thinking of the violent shout just now, Li Sheng's evaluation of Zhou Heng rose a little in an instant. This sorcerer, who was only in the realm of practice, had a sense of mystery in his heart. After Zhou Heng held the two soldiers firmly for a long time, when they yelled, they let them go, then stood up, looked at Li Sheng, and nodded at him, meaning the problem is completely solved. However, after nodding, Zhou Heng looked at a corpse that was split on the ground again, a trace of regret flashed in his eyes, and then he spoke. This corpse is contaminated with an evil aura, so burn it, otherwise it may turn into an evil in the future. Hearing Zhou Heng's words, Li Sheng also looked at the corpse on the ground and was silent for 2 breaths before Li Sheng spoke. Go and burn this corpse, remember to take the ashes, and send it back to his hometown when you return. Don't let him bury it here. After saying this, Li Sheng turned around and went to the carriage, facing the King Niu who had already woken up in the carriage, and briefly reported the situation just now. After Li Sheng's report was over, Zhou Heng was invited into the carriage again. This kind of thing happened at night, with the warlock by his side, which gave people a sense of security. Besides, King Ren really didn't have the slightest sleepiness now. Including the princess next to her, only the little majesty in the carriage was still a little sleepy. Zhou Heng got on the carriage, and King Niu immediately smiled and said, "Thanks to the presence of a mage tonight, I can solve the evil so smoothly. Otherwise, I am afraid I will lose a lot tonight." His Royal Highness has won the award. In fact, thanks to General Li, he killed the evil with his own hands. He has a low-level cultivation base, but only assists by the side. Zhou Heng said in a deep voice. Nio's attitude towards him now seems to be a little bit more enthusiastic than in the daytime. It may be that after hearing what Li Sheng said just now, he valued him a little bit more than before. Originally wooing a little warlock in the realm of magic practice might be just a desperate choice. After all, there is only such a warlock in front of me, but now I find that this little warlock in the realm of magic practice is not easy, so of course I have to be more concerned about it. While Zhou Heng dealt with it, he focused his attention outside at the same time, watching Li Sheng led a group of soldiers to deal with the corpse just now. Compared with the carriage, the atmosphere outside is relatively silent. After all, it was a robe who died here. Even if they were mentally prepared to die in battle and were accustomed to life and death, they could face this kind of thing. It is impossible to be truly untouched. In the next conversation with Zhou Heng, King Ren noticed Zhou Heng's distraction very sensitively, and his face immediately became sad. When the flame lit outside was about to burn the soldier's corpse, King Ni got out of the carriage with some difficulty. With the help of the princess, he walked to the burning corpse step by step, and then said in a sad tone, "Although this soldier died because of evil, he came here to protect me, so he died because of me. Now I don't want to repay, I can only return to the capital and repay again. There are soldiers who escorted me on the road, thank you very much, and you will get something back when you return to the capital." Nioa's voice was not too loud, and his speech seemed a little lackluster, but his words made the hearts of some soldiers a little bit moved. When Zhou Heng heard these words from him behind, although he was not impressed by these words in his heart, he still had a slight increase in his evaluation of His Royal Highness. Although the other party's remarks are suspected of buying people's hearts, and the benefits promised, it is not clear what to give, but according to the current situation of the other party, he can only do so. In any case, at this time Neo stood up and said such a few words, the effect will definitely be better than staying in the carriage. Will anyone be touched by him? At least in everyone's mind, you will feel a little bit. The soldiers who protected him from the battle did not seem to have died in vain. Zhou Heng withdrew his gaze from there, and inadvertently glanced at the child remaining in the carriage, and found that this 5 or 6-year-old boy was looking at himself curiously at this time, and he smiled at him. He also touched his head smoothly. Seeing the child, Zhou Heng subconsciously wanted to find some snacks to coax him, but at this time he didn't have any snacks on his body, so he stretched out his hand and took out 2 bamboo slices in his bag. The technique was very flexible. After assembling, a bamboo dragonfly that is not so delicate was made. Gently rubbing both hands, the bamboo dragonfly in Zhou Heng's hand flew up, touched the top of the carriage, and then fell off again. Zhou Heng caught it, then handed it to the little guy in the carriage, and got out of the carriage. The little boy in the carriage took the bamboo dragonfly handed over by Zhou Heng and looked at it with great interest. Then, after learning what Zhou Heng was just now, he played in this small carriage. This kind of toy, which is not very difficult. After being demonstrated by others, he quickly learned how to play. Although the carriage blocked the height of the bamboo dragonfly, the little boy still showed a long-lost smile on his face. After Zhou Heng got out of the carriage, he also came to the burning fire. Looking at the broken body that had been wrapped in flames, Zhou Heng was silent. After coming to this world, it was not the first time he saw someone who died in response to evil, and even he himself almost became a corpse because of evil. Only one person died when encountering evil, and this kind of loss was actually relatively minor. The flames continued to burn, and everyone around was watching so quietly. King Ren stood outside for a while because his body hadn't recovered yet. When the body was almost burnt, he returned to the carriage with the help of the princess. There is still a period of time before dawn. Some soldiers began to gather the ashes of their robes, and a few others remained on guard, while the rest seized the time and took a break as much as possible. However, at this time, there are only a small number of people who can still fall asleep, and most people still cannot sleep even if they close their eyes. Zhou Heng didn't have the mind to continue practicing at this time. He was lying on the ground with his arms resting on his head, looking at the sky, thinking about what happened just now. This is the first time he has dealt with an evil as a warlock himself. Except for the time he was in danger 2 years ago, he followed his previous master and watched his previous master take action. Zhou Heng couldn't say how satisfied with his performance this time, but he also felt that he was not too bad. After all, he faced the evil once, a resentment level evil, this level of evil, the realm of practice. A warlock with a cultivation base can handle it under normal circumstances. The reason why it is said to be an ordinary situation, of course, must consider that the magician borrows the power of the gods or spirits he worships. In that case, the result is not easy to say. Zhou Heng recalled the resentment level evil he encountered today. In fact, during the whole process, it did not exert its true power and was directly wiped out by the power of thunder. The evil and weird attack was exposed very lightly after encountering a group of well-trained soldiers, and then there was an existence like Li Sheng that could kill it, plus Zhou Heng's ability, so that he did not exert his strength at all. Opportunity. Thinking of his abilities, Zhou Heng couldn't help but begin to feel the power in his body. In his body, there are actually two powers at present. One power is of course the mana he has cultivated, and the other power is the little bit of turbid energy he has absorbed through the inheritance of the witch clan bloodline. The power transformed into. Compared to his mana, the power that absorbed the turbid energy was actually even weaker. If you didn't sense it carefully, you might not be able to sense its existence at this time. This power transformed from turbid chi does not walk along the meridians in his body like mana, but is scattered in the flesh, contained in the flesh and blood. It is somewhat like the blood chi cultivated by a warrior, but it is completely different. The violent shout that Zhou Heng had just dealt with the evil was caused by mobilizing this force. This is also an attack method he has currently explored by himself after absorbing the Earth's foul air. Sure enough, absorbing the power generated by the Earth's turbid air, facing the evils of this world, the current effect seems to be pretty close. This power transformed from the Earth's turbid energy, although it has made meritorious service today, but looking back now, Zhou Heng is still keenly aware that the effect of this power in the face of evil and insubstantial things is actually better than what I expected. It's a little weaker. When he first figured out this method of attack and experimented with a beast, the power was actually even greater. When the sun had not risen and the night had just begun to fade, the team of Zhou Heng and others had already cleaned up early and was ready to continue to set off. Everyone didn't rest well this night. It was the same time as usual, but this night made people feel particularly long. Although they were preparing to go on the road again so early, everyone was actually looking forward to leaving early. After some hasty cleaning, the team began to move as a whole, and soon left the camp yesterday. There was only a trace of scorched earth in the place where they settled in the camp yesterday, proving that someone stayed here yesterday. However, the processed traces will be buried by the Lois soon after everyone leaves, and basically nothing will be seen. After the team walked for an hour or so, the sky was completely bright. Zhou Heng raised his head and glanced at the sky. There is no cloud in the sky. It must be a good weather today. Maybe it's because it's dawn, or because everyone knows that today I can get out of the borderline and return to Yu Kingdom, so the overall morale of the team seems to be much better. In addition, in the carriage in the middle of the team, there will be laughter from time to time of the children, so that some soldiers in the team gradually have some smiles on their faces. At this speed, in the afternoon, we can enter the territory of Yu Kingdom, and then arrive at Anyuan Pass on the border, where we can rest for a while, and then go to Yuchen, along the official road, or by the waterway. You can go all the way to the royal capital. In front of the team, Li Sheng began to talk with Zhou Heng again. After this afternoon, he will be able to enter Yu Kingdom, and the pressure on his body will be less at that time, so at this time Li Sheng also talked a little more. After hearing Li Sheng's words, Zhou Heng, who was a little behind, did not respond to him with words, only smiled at him. Seeing this kind of performance by Zhou Heng, Li Sheng couldn't help but move in his heart. He took a deep look at Zhou Heng, and then didn't continue to say anything. However, in his heart, Li Sheng just got a little relaxed mood, which has now disappeared, replaced by more vigilance. He and Zhou Heng were in contact in just one day. Through some conversations and contacts, he knew that Zhou Heng could be trusted. At least for now, the goals of the two are the same. Li Sheng knows more about Yu's internal situation than Zhou Heng, and of some problems that Zhou Heng can think of, he can of course also think of it, but because he is about to return to his country, he will inevitably have some slack in his heart. Now because of Zhou Heng's reaction just now made him renew his vigilance and began to consider the dangers he would encounter after returning to Yu Kingdom. In fact, Li Sheng didn't need anyone to remind him of these things, he just didn't want to think about it. The team walked forward silently. By the time the weather was relatively hot at noon, Zhou Heng was already around and found some traces of people moving, which indicated that they were very close to leaving the wasteland. After taking a rest for the last time in the middle, a group of about 100 people set off again on the road, and when everyone took a rest next time, they should have already reached the territory of Yu Kingdom. And Zhou Heng, who was about to arrive in the territory of Yu Kingdom, was riding on a horse, but he was very vigilant at this time, because if he wanted to attack King Ren, at the last moment he was about to return to Yu Kingdom, he was very vigilant at this time. It's a good time to start. At this time, the soldiers around were a little relaxed because they returned to their homeland. Neo himself, I am afraid that his mood was somewhat ups and downs, and it was indeed a good time to start. And the most important point is that everyone is only about to reach the territory of Yu Kingdom, and has not really arrived yet. Even if there is an accident here, whether the person who started the attack is from the Kingdom of Yu or the Kingdom of Qi, you can make a good argument. It's ridiculous, come and go, things will calm down soon. Thinking about this, you can know that the last part of the road in this wasteland is indeed a good place to start. Afternoon, the weather did not immediately cool down, but the surrounding temperature became hotter and hotter, but these were not as hot as everyone's hearts. The King Ren in the carriage has opened the curtains of the carriage more than once. Looking outside, Zhou Heng glanced at him inadvertently, and found that His Highness seemed to have tears in his eyes, and his mood was ups and downs. Thinking about it, you can understand that in a foreign country, as a proton, for so many years, living in fear and fear every day, I can only do everything possible to protect myself, cautiously not to offend anyone. Now I finally set foot on my homeland, and while I gradually began to feel at ease, the sadness of nearly 10 years suddenly rushed to my heart, and naturally it would make the man cry. It's like a wanderer who has been wandering outside for many years. When he is outside, he can grit his teeth and endure even if he has suffered a lot of bitterness and white eyes. Only when he comes home and has a place to be at ease, he will feel aggrieved and cry. But the tears won't be seen by others, it's just to vent your emotions. The border of Yu Kingdom is getting closer and closer. Zhou Heng can't help looking around, looking for hidden dangers. Li Sheng has left the front line of the team, silently approaching the carriage and in the carriage. Several knights were also arranged on the left and right sides. Neo also noticed this. He was a little excited, but he immediately calmed down. He also realized that even when he returned to his homeland and didn't really enter the royal capital, he hadn't escaped the danger yet, so he didn't get out of the car window anymore. Poked his head. Just when Zhou Heng and others increased their vigilance, Zhou Heng finally noticed a problem. He heard a sharp piercing sound in his ears, as if something was flying at extreme speed. Following the direction of the sound, Zhou Heng saw something that looked like an arrow. Because it was too fast, he could see a vague outline, and it was flying in the direction of the carriage. Coming! Zhou Heng whispered in his heart, then immediately turned over and dismounted. The speed of the arrow-like thing was too fast. Even if Zhou Heng discovered it in advance, he did not have the ability to stop it. Fortunately, there was Li Sheng next to the carriage. He was able to reflect it, and he was timely. Make a response. Sure enough, Li Sheng's reaction did not disappoint Zhou Heng at all. The long knife in his hand was instantly unsheathed, a heat wave spread around his body, and the long knife slammed forward, bringing an invisible sword energy towards it. The swift arrow slashed away. Boom! The next moment, a huge explosion sounded, and the moment the knife gas and the arrow collided, they turned into a ball of fire at the same time, and the large group of flames spread to the surrounding at the same time. The carriages that were several meters long were damaged to a certain extent. Zhou Heng, who had just turned over and got off his horse, saw this scene, and couldn't help being a little surprised at the power of the arrow just now. An arrow with such a fast speed can still have such a powerful force. It can be said that the person who launches an attack is it's pretty awesome. The other party is a powerful character, and he did not show up at all, so Zhou Heng was unable to deal with it by ordinary methods, so he made a decisive decision at this time and directly took out the feather that he had used before from his bag, and prepared to use the spirit power. Anyway, the spirit that this feather can communicate was offered by his previous master. It is estimated that during this mission, he can barely borrow some power. After the mission is over, I'm afraid he won't respond again. This use it whenever you can. Lingzun Flying Bird, born with spirit, flying feather as faith, borrow your supernatural powers, please spirit. Zhou Heng was holding the feather in his hand, and at the same time chanting the mantra of inviting spirits quickly in his mouth. Now he has no time to prepare to worship anything, so he can only communicate directly in this way. As the chanting of his mantra ended, the feathers he held in his hand immediately became aura. At the same time, another sharp sound of breaking through the air sounded, and the same arrow as before, from a completely different direction from the previous one, hit again at a rapid speed. Li Sheng, who was next to the carriage, naturally had to block again at this time, but when he repeated his old trick and wielded the same sword spirit as before, the situation he encountered was a little different from just now. The power of this arrow seems to be stronger than that of the previous arrow. When Li Sheng's sword energy collided with this arrow, the range of the explosion caused Li Sheng to be close to him. A knight was wrapped in it together, and the roof of the carriage where Neo was riding was also overturned by the power of the explosion. Seeing Li Sheng surrounded by the flames of the explosion, Zhou Heng was shocked for an instant, but he immediately saw that Li Sheng held a knife in one hand and the knight who was engulfed by the flame with him just now. The flame rushed out, and his heart was immediately certain. Judging from Li Sheng's appearance, although he is a little more embarrassed than before, he does not seem to have suffered any injuries, that is, his hair and eyebrows may be lost. In contrast, the knight rescued by him is in a more serious condition. There are obvious burn marks on the face. There was nothing wrong with Li Sheng, and Zhou Heng did not dare to hesitate at all. He must quickly catch the attacker, otherwise, everyone will face a steady stream of attacks. Lingzun Flying Bird, born with spirit, bird, and bird listen to orders, for my eyes. With a quick chant in his mouth, Zhou Heng circulated the mana in his body, and a faint clear light spread out on the feathers in his hand. After that, Zhou Heng felt as if he had a few more visions at once, and he was absolutely sure. Most of the field of vision is still looking down from high in the sky. These are the sights of some birds flying around. With the help of these sights, Zhou Heng immediately searched the ground. Within a range of more than 3,000 meters around the team, there was no discovery until Zhou Heng searched. After placing it 5 kilometers away, he finally found a figure on the ground, with a table in front of him, holding a very small bow in his hand, pulling the bowstring, ready to shoot an arrow. Found it! Looking at this figure, Zhou Heng knew that he had found the righteous master.